The night was like any other night in Palm Springs, but the living room was far from ordinary. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was about to record new tracks, and the tension was thick. RCA had sent over a mobile recording truck and a tape of 4 instrumental tracks from the Stax sessions. They set up microphones right in the middle of Elvis's living room, but without any monitor speakers, it was nearly impossible for the singers to hear themselves. To make matters worse, one of the singers, at Elvis's insistence, had just had a hair transplant. His head was all bandaged up, and it kept bleeding throughout the session. Blood was dripping onto the floor while we tried to focus on the music. It was a bizarre and chaotic scene, but Elvis didn't seem to notice. He was more concerned with cutting demos of some songs he and his friends had written for his new publishing company. RCA made sure Elvis paid for this himself, which didn't sit well with him, but he didn't let it show. We only managed to finish one of the 4 tracks RCA had provided, Sweet Angeline. Elvis decided to sing a song by Donnie Sumner called I Miss You, promising to handle the publishing himself. Then Cheryl Nielsen sat down at the piano and played a song he used to perform as a child at talent contests. It was Are You Sincere, an Andy Williams hit, and it became the final cut for the album. When the basic tracks were done, the Colonel, Elvis's manager, stepped in and told Elvis no further overdubs could be added. He also suggested strongly to RCA that Felton Jarvis, the producer, should have nothing more to do with the album. The Colonel was always trying to control everything, and this was no exception. RCA released Raised on Rock, for all time's sake, in September 1973, followed by the album Raised on Rock a month later. But both the album and the single were commercial failures. RCA saw this as a sign that they needed to get rid of Felton Jarvis. They tried to set up a meeting with Elvis to discuss it, but they didn't realize how much he disliked being told what to do. Elvis had been independent for over 15 years, and he wasn't about to change now. There was a new complication. Joan Deary, the head of RCA Nashville division, had scheduled another album to be released around the same time. The Colonel was furious and did everything he could to delay the release of Elvis, a legendary performer, Vol. 1, until January. When it finally came out, it was a huge success, selling 700,000 copies. It was a stark reminder that Elvis's past glories still outshone his current work. On October 9, 1973, Elvis and Priscilla Presley walked out of a Santa Monica courthouse, their divorce finalized. They looked composed and friendly in the newspaper photos, but just days later, Elvis was rushed to the hospital with breathing and congestion problems. Some said he was there to dry out. He was released after 18 days and visited his new girlfriend Linda Thompson's parents' home. Her brother Sam recorded Elvis singing a few old favorites, and it was clear he was trying to find his way back to his roots. Back in Memphis, Elvis insisted on returning to Stax Studios for the next recording session. RCA brought in their best engineers to ensure everything went smoothly. The recording truck was equipped with 2 16-track tape machines, and the studio was set up with a top-notch monitoring system. The band was pared down to the essentials, with James Burton on guitar and Ron Tutt on drums. David Briggs was on piano, and Norbert Putnam was on bass. The backup singers, including J.D. Sumner and the Stamps, added a rich harmony to the mix. The night started with I Got a Feeling in My Body, a funky religious number. Elvis was excited to be back in the studio, even though he was still 30 pounds overweight and wearing a cape. The song was a great kickoff, and after a few tempo adjustments, they nailed it on take 3. Elvis's voice started to wear thin, but the playback confirmed they had what they needed. The next night, Elvis seemed more relaxed and was clowning around, cussing, and singing old songs. They started with You Asked Me To, a Waylon Jennings song. Elvis got it right on the second try, but Felton wanted more. They fought through a few more takes, but eventually they got the perfect version. Elvis's friend Red West wrote a smoky soul number called If You Talk in Your Sleep, and the band created a propulsive arrangement. They finished the master, and Elvis serenaded everyone with lines from Find Out What's Happening. But when he realized there was no food, he canceled the rest of the session and left, apologizing to everyone. Elvis was back in the studio, and despite the chaos, he was determined to make great music. The Colonel and RCA might have their plans, but Elvis was the king, and he was calling the shots. The group voice was really getting comfortable in Elvis's world. They brought a bunch of their own songs, and those by their friends to play. Lamar Fike, who was like Elvis's right-hand man, didn't like this at all. He got really mad when Elvis was recording a song by Donnie Sumner called Mr. Songman. Lamar even said, "Who wrote this piece of junk?" But Elvis stuck with his new friends and the Colonel, who wanted to make more money from songs. Elvis even released Mr. Songman as the B-side of a single. One of the voice members, Tim Beatty, wrote a song called Thinking About You on his first try. It was different from what the band usually played, but Elvis still liked it enough to put it on a single. At the session, they played a lot of new songs, and some were really good. Bringing It Back by Greg Gordon and Help Me by Larry Gatlin were two of the best. Help Me became one of Elvis's favorite songs to sing live. He even dropped to his knees to sing it during one of the sessions. The next night, Elvis started with a song called My Boy, which he had been singing in his shows. It was a sad song about losing a child in a divorce, and Elvis wanted to get it over with quickly. When the producer, Felton, asked for a third take, Elvis got really upset and said, "I told you to get this thing in 2 takes. I can't sing it no more." But the third take turned out to be the best. Then they played Loving Arms, a song by Tom Jans. It was perfect for Elvis's voice, and the musicians played it beautifully. Another song, Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues, was written by Danny O'Keefe. Elvis sang it with so much feeling, and it was amazing. He left out a part about taking pills to ease the pain, but the rest of the song was incredible. The next night, they started with a gospel song called Talk About the Good Times. The band played it really fast, and it was a lot of fun. They also tried a song called We Had It All, but couldn't get it right. Elvis wanted to try again the next day, but it didn't work out. He said, "I just don't know how to improve this." To unwind, they played Chuck Berry's Promised Land. Elvis was in control and pointed out a wrong note to one of the guitar players. The song was really fun, and they ended up playing it really fast and lively. They also recorded a song called Your Love's Been a Long Time Coming, which Elvis really liked. He listened to it over and over, and the band stayed late to get it just right. Elvis even joked around with everyone to keep them awake and excited. On the last night, Elvis's voice sounded stronger than ever. They played a spiritual song called If That Isn't Love and then Spanish Eyes. Elvis wanted to do Spanish Eyes differently from how he had sung it before, and it turned out great. They also worked on She Wears My Ring, which Elvis loved and had been singing for years. 1973 was a tough year for Elvis. He had a big success with his Aloha from Hawaii show, but then everything went downhill. He had trouble with his record sales, his divorce, and his health. But after these sessions, there was a glimmer of hope. Felton had recorded 18 new songs in just a week, and it seemed like Elvis might be turning things around. In 1974, things were a bit calmer. Elvis didn't record any new songs, but he did a lot of touring. He played in Las Vegas, Lake Tahoe, and went on 4 tours. Live shows were where he made the most money. The Colonel decided to record another live album, this time from a special show in Memphis. It was Elvis's first time performing in his hometown since 1961, and it was a big deal. The show at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis was just like any other, with no special rehearsal. They recorded songs like Let Me Be There, Why Me Lord, and Help Me. The highlight was Elvis's powerful version of How Great Thou Art, which won him his 3rd Grammy for Best Sacred Recording. The album from the Memphis show was called Elvis as Recorded Live on Stage in Memphis. It had some great songs, but it wasn't as exciting as his earlier live albums. Elvis's record sales were up and down, but only a small group of loyal fans were still buying his albums. Despite this, he was still drawing huge crowds at his concerts. There was a bit of tension at RCA over Elvis's producer, Felton Jarvis. A lady named Joan Deary, who had worked with Elvis for a long time, thought Felton wasn't doing a good job. She suggested that Elvis needed a new producer, but Elvis didn't want to let Felton go. The December sessions with Felton were better, but the albums still didn't sell well. In August 1974, Elvis had some studio rehearsals in Hollywood. They tried out a few songs, but the quality of the recordings wasn't great. They were just recorded on a cassette tape. Even though 1974 was a bit of a quiet year, Elvis was still a legend. He was performing live and still had a strong following, even if his record sales weren't what they used to be. I remember the August before the Las Vegas engagement. I was really excited and worked hard on new songs. I practiced a lot, even more than usual. I had some favorites like I'm Leaving and The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, even though they didn't do well when they came out. I also added some new songs that I hadn't recorded before, like The 12th of Never and Softly As I Leave You. I was really into Olivia Newton-John's If You Love Me Let Me Go, and thought it was a happy song, even though some people worried it was too boring, but something strange happened. After all that practice, a lot of the new songs didn't make it to the show. The excitement from before was gone, and the shows just didn't feel the same. My behavior started getting really weird. I'd sneak into the Hilton showroom with my friends and spray paint the White Angels black. People started talking about me, saying I was on drugs. I tried to deny it on stage, but I couldn't stop talking about it. On the last night of the show, I was all over the place. I talked for so long, and it was really embarrassing. I introduced my ex-wife Priscilla and my daughter Lisa Marie, and then I went on about our divorce and the money stuff. I talked about my friends and even a guy named Bill Cosby, who wasn't even there. I kept going on about how I wasn't strung out on drugs, and I got really angry. I said I'd break someone's neck if they said I was on drugs. It was a mess, and the audience must have thought I was losing it. Colonel Tom Parker, my manager, tried to spin it as a good thing. He put out an album called Having Fun with Elvis on stage, with just my talking from the shows. It sold pretty well, but at home things weren't as good. I looked pale and bloated, and I couldn't focus. I had to cancel a show in January because I was in no shape to perform. In January, a few weeks after my 40th birthday, I had to go to the hospital. They found some problems with my colon and my eyes. They tried to help me stop taking drugs, but some of my friends kept giving them to me. My dad had a heart attack around the same time, and we both had to stay in the hospital for a while. When I got out, I went to Los Angeles to prepare for a shorter show in Las Vegas. We set up a rehearsal and recording session at RCA Studio in Hollywood. We worked on songs like Fairytale, Green, Green Grass of Home, and I Can Help. I struggled a bit with the high notes on Fairytale, but I did better on Green, Green Grass of Home. We also did And I Love You So, and Susan When She Tried. I had to push through on Susan When She Tried, but it turned out okay. My bass player, Duke Bardwell, had a tough time. I wasn't happy with his playing, and we ended up replacing his parts with other bass players. But his only surviving recording with me was Trouble, a new song by Jerry Chestnut. I really liked it, and we got it right away. We also did some old songs like Tiger Man, which we used to play for fun. It was a good break from the serious stuff. We finished with Woman Without Love, Shake a Hand, and Bringin' It Back. I was thinking about doing a song called Country Bumpkin, but I changed my mind at the last minute. By the end of the sessions, we had a lot of good songs, but I was still dealing with a lot of personal issues. It was a tough time, but we kept moving forward. I remember the night I recorded Pieces of My Life. It was almost like fate had decided I needed one more chance to sing about my regrets, the kind that run deep and stay with you. I sang with all the sincerity and determination I had, and it showed. I kept the musicians waiting for hours, listening to the playback over and over. I wanted to make sure it was perfect. When Felton finally transferred the master tape to a cassette, I listened to it at least 30 times. It was haunting, and it felt like it was part of me. The next day, we were all set to keep working, but the session was interrupted. Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys burst in. He was recording his solo album nearby and wanted to meet me. The room filled up with both of our entourages, and the whole place turned into a circus. No more recording that day. The next night, we started rehearsing for the Las Vegas show. We picked 5 new songs from the recent sessions and added some old favorites like Tomorrow Night and Wear My Ring Around Your Neck. We tried a couple of Don Robertson ballads, but they didn't make the cut. There were other songs I thought could work in the show, like Susie Q and You Can Have Her, but they never became regular parts of the set. The rough mixes of the new album caused a lot of tension. The mixes were just meant to give everyone an idea of what the new songs sounded like, but I was furious when I heard them. I demanded that Felton remix and overdub everything in Nashville before it could be released. The album was already running late, so we compromised on the single. We paired an unrepaired Trouble with Mr. Songman, a recording from the year before. It was the last time RCA tried to control my recordings. Despite how I looked and my mixed track record, I was still a big draw in Vegas and on the road. As long as I kept singing, kept the banter to a minimum, and maintained my busy schedule, I could keep making money. The feel of those shows was documented later on RCA. Elvis Aaron Presley, The Silver Box. The performances were solid, but there wasn't much real spark. During this period, I found more joy in business ventures, like an unrealized karate documentary, than in my live shows. Music was my job, but my artistic ambitions had faded. I tried to update the show, like taking requests from the audience, but it only lasted 5 performances. The August Las Vegas engagement was canceled after 3 days, and I ended up in the hospital again. RCA and the Colonel kept trying to package the material we had. The album Promised Land featured the leftover Stax material from 1973. It had 2 top 20 singles, If You Talk in Your Sleep and Promised Land, but it only got to number 47 on the charts. The album Today, from March 1975, didn't do much better. People still preferred my old hits, and a mid-price compilation called Pure Gold sold really well for years. Older songs were repackaged for mail order, and the Colonel had plans for an album called Elvis Sings for Children and Grown-Ups Too, but it didn't come out until after I was gone. While I was recovering at Graceland, I started working on new material for the December Las Vegas show. I wrote to the Colonel in October, suggesting we plan a new album that would combine studio material with live recordings from the show. I thought it would give a better flavor with all the new material. But after some initial enthusiasm, only 2 new songs made it into the show, America the Beautiful and Softly As I Leave You. The idea for the album was dropped. In 1976, I was getting more and more bored with everything. Cheryl Nielsen, a member of the backup group, told me he heard me say, "I'm so bored." My producer, Felton Jarvis, heard the same thing. I'm so tired of being Elvis Presley. It was hard to get me to even think about going back into the studio. The plan to record in Las Vegas had fallen through, and the only way to break the stalemate was to record at Graceland. RCA had promised to build me a studio, so they brought their recording truck to the house and turned the jungle room into a recording studio. Brian Christian, the engineer, came out 2 weeks before the session to set everything up. The room needed a lot of work to make it sound right. He had to drape the walls with heavy moving blankets to dampen the acoustics, but the electrical setup was amazing. He found 700 amps and a standby generator. The RCA recording truck had to be towed through the gates of Graceland because its transmission died. The speakers they brought weren't big enough for the room, so we used my bedroom system. The playback sound wasn't great, but I was thrilled with the setup. I wanted to keep the room the way it was after we were done. Felton believed he could deliver 20 new masters, enough for 2 albums, and he had a budget of $378.00 for 6 nights of recording. The first night we recorded Bitter They Are, Harder They Fall, She Thinks I Still Care, and The Last Farewell. The next night we worked on Solitaire, but it took all night to get right. The following night we tried I'll Never Fall in Love Again, but I couldn't hit the notes or convey the feeling. I moved on to Moody Blue, which had a disco feel. After a few tries, we got it right on the 10th take. We went back to I'll Never Fall in Love Again and managed to finish it. The sessions continued and we recorded For the Heart, Hurt, Danny Boy, Never Again, Love Coming Down, and Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. It wasn't easy, but we got through it. The Jungle Room sessions were a mix of frustration and determination, but in the end, we had new material to share with the world. I was in a bit of a bind. We'd already spent over 13 hours trying to get just 2 songs right. and I had to go back to RCA and ask for more money, $30,000 more. I felt pretty embarrassed, but the problems weren't all my fault. The whole project was behind schedule, and some of the key musicians, like Jerry Sheff and James Burton, had to leave early to go on tour with Emmylou Harris, and then there was Elvis. No matter what I did, he'd get sidetracked, singing old Platters songs or wasting time on Feelings by Morris Albert. RCA expected me to keep everything under control, but how do you control Elvis Presley? Through a friend, I got a hold of a new song called For the Heart by Dennis Lind. Elvis seemed to like it, and the band really got into it. It was a fun, swinging tune, and James Burton even got a chance to show off his guitar skills. Jerry Sheff's bass lines added a cool, swampy vibe. But the real magic happened when Elvis decided to tackle Roy Hamilton's Hurt. It was a song from 1955, and it had a powerful melody that really pushed Elvis to the limit. His performance was amazing, full of emotion and sincerity. It was probably the best recording he made during those sessions, and it even became part of his live shows. Critics loved it too. After Hurt, we tried Danny Boy, but it was a tough one for Elvis. He asked to play it in a higher key, but he couldn't hit the high notes. He was pretty frustrated, but instead of getting angry like he usually did, he just seemed resigned. We worked hard on it, and by the 10th take we had a good version. It was around 2 in the afternoon, and after 17 hours of recording, Elvis joked, "Bring out the booze, Grandma." His grandmother lived in a room just off the kitchen, and it was a funny moment. The next night we started again at midnight, but the room's acoustics were a bit off. Elvis tried to get the band to loosen up, but it was hard. There was a mix-up where Elvis thought Ronnie Tutt said drunk instead of drums, and he joked about getting drunk. It was all in good fun, but we only managed to record 2 more songs that night. They were decent, but not great. The next day, 3 of the key musicians had to leave, so I had to shuffle some players around. David Briggs moved to piano, and I called in Norbert Putnam to help out on bass. We also brought in Billy Sanford on guitar, even though he'd never worked with Elvis before. Elvis wanted to record America the Beautiful, but he was so tired and out of it that he couldn't really explain what he wanted. We gave up on that one and recorded a cover of Willie Nelson's Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain instead. Elvis was pretty irritated, and he snapped at David Briggs a couple of times. It was a tough night, and we wrapped up around 7 a.m. The next day's session was canceled, and that was it for the Graceland recordings. I went to a studio in Murfreesboro to mix and overdub what we had. It was a lot more expensive than I'd planned, and we didn't have as many good songs as I hoped. But Hurt and For the Heart were standouts. A month later, I was sitting in a restaurant in Johnson City, and I told a writer how great Danny Boy sounded. The album, From Elvis Presley Boulevard, Memphis, Tennessee, came out with a not-so-great cover, but it still sold well. RCA released Moody Blue, and She Thinks I Still Care as singles, but they didn't do as well as we hoped. We scheduled another session for after Elvis's October tour. The RCA crew was ready when he got back, and we started on October 29th. Mike Morin, our engineer, brought better equipment to improve the sound. After a day off, we started at 9 p.m. with the road band. Elvis was in a good mood, and even joked about the band's mistakes. We worked on It's Easy for You by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. The lyrics fit Elvis's life at the time his relationship with Linda Thompson was falling apart, and he was losing touch with some of his old friends. He even said, "I get carried away very easily, emotional son of a bitch." Elvis was really into Way Down and Pledging My Love, and the band sounded great. We even tried a new song by Jerry Sheff called There's a Fire Down Below, but Elvis got distracted and went back to his room. The next night, he came back dressed in a gangster outfit, which was a bit scary. We managed to record He'll Have to Go, but Elvis wasn't in great shape. He apologized to everyone and said he didn't know about the session. We ended up with only 4 new songs, plus the 2 singles. RCA was disappointed, and Elvis missed another session in January. I was running out of ideas and even tried to trick Elvis into recording There's a Fire Down Below by playing the instrumental track for him. But it was a tough time, and we had to make the best of what we had. Month after month, I kept asking Elvis for studio time to record new songs. But every time it seemed like Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, had another tour planned. I knew that Elvis was struggling, and his performances often weren't what they used to be. Some nights, he was so out of it that he could barely sing. Other times, he just seemed tired and uninspired. It was hard to watch, and I couldn't help but wonder how much longer this could go on. Elvis had been a huge star for over 2 decades, but the media didn't seem to care much about his recent albums. The loyal fans still loved him, but I could tell that Elvis was tired of playing the same old game. He'd been complaining for years about how hard it was to live up to the image people had of him, but it was all he knew. It was the only way he could keep things going. Finally, I decided that the only way to get new material was to catch something during one of the tours. I followed Elvis and his band to various concert halls, hoping to find a decent performance. The shows were hit or miss, but I managed to record a few songs. The best I could come up with were Little Darlin', If You Love Me Let Me Know, and a pretty good version of Unchained Melody, but even these weren't great. Unchained Melody was a tribute to Roy Hamilton, and it was one of the better songs, but it still felt like a patch-up job. The Colonel, always looking for quick cash, negotiated a new TV deal. He knew that Elvis's performances were getting worse, but the money was too tempting to pass up. We filmed the special in Omaha, Nebraska, and Rapid City, South Dakota. The first show was a disaster. Elvis was bloated, pale, and barely coherent. He stumbled through the performance, and at one point he stopped during "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" and mumbled, "And I am, and I was." It was heartbreaking, and the cameras caught it all. CBS was sure the footage was unusable, but they had to try the second show, which was only slightly better. I spent the next few months traveling with Elvis, trying to find more material for the album. I recorded a lot of shows, but most of the performances were so poor that I had to discard them. I was afraid that releasing such low-quality recordings would only hurt Elvis's career. I managed to put together an album called Moody Blue, but it was a struggle. I included a few new songs and some that had been released before, like Let Me Be There from 1974. The single Way Down and Pledging My Love showed some promise, but it was a far cry from the magic we used to capture in the studio. The next tour was supposed to start in Portland, Maine, on August 16, 1977, but that morning Elvis died. It was a shock to everyone. The Colonel said something about it being like when Elvis went into the Army, but it felt more like a cold, calculated comment. After Elvis's death, his music and memorabilia started selling like crazy again. People were buying everything with his name on it, just like they did in the 1950s. In the years that followed, RCA realized that fans were hungry for more of Elvis's music. They started releasing unreleased tracks and outtakes, and it brought a new wave of interest in Elvis as a performer. The label released several box sets that finally put his recordings in order and context. It was a way to honor his legacy and show the world just how much he had achieved. Lester Bangs, a writer, said, "We will never agree on anything as we agreed on Elvis, and what we agreed on most was his music. It was the one thing that brought us all together, no matter what we thought about the man himself. It was a wild ride, but my journey through music was just beginning." By 1957, I was already a household name, and the world couldn't get enough of my tunes. I remember the excitement when Long Tall Sally and First in Line hit the charts. It felt like the start of something big. Then came All Shook Up, and That's When Your Heartaches Begin, and I knew I was on a roll, but it wasn't just about the hits. I wanted to connect with people on a deeper level. That's why I released Peace in the Valley as an EP. Songs like I Believe and Take My Hand, Precious Lord resonated with so many, and it was a powerful feeling. The EP Loving You followed with tracks like Teddy Bear and Party, which showed a different side of me, a more playful and energetic one. The year 1957 was also when I released my first Christmas album, Elvis Christmas Album. It was a mix of classic holiday songs and some new ones, like Blue Christmas and Santa Claus is Back in Town. The album was a big hit, and it brought a lot of joy to people during the holiday season. In 1958, I continued to grow as an artist. Elvis Golden Records was a compilation of my greatest hits, and it was a way for fans to have all their favorite songs in one place. Jailhouse Rock was a big moment for me not just as a song but as a movie. The energy of that film and the title track were unforgettable. I also released King Creole, an album that showcased a more mature sound. Songs like New Orleans and Trouble were a departure from my earlier rock and roll hits, and they showed that I could tackle different genres. The EP's King Creole Vol. 1 and King Creole Vol. 2 were part of this, with tracks that fans still love today. By 1959, I was back with more hits like A Big Hunk O' Love and A Date with Elvis. The album A Date with Elvis featured a mix of old favorites and new songs, and it was a way to show that I could keep evolving. Elvis Golden Records Vol. 2 was another compilation, but it also included new tracks like I Need Your Love Tonight and One Night. The early 1960s brought more changes. Elvis Is Back was a return to form with hits like Fever and The Girl of My Best Friend. G.I. Blues was a nod to my time in the military, and it included Blue Suede Shoes and Wooden Heart, which became a big hit in Europe. 1960 was also when I released His Hand in Mine, an album of gospel songs. It was a personal project, and it showed a different side of me. The songs were meaningful, and they spoke to my faith and the values I held dear. The following years were filled with more movies and music. Blue Hawaii was a fun project with songs like Can't Help Falling in Love and Hawaiian Wedding Song. Follow That Dream and Kiss Me Quick were also part of this period, with tracks that fans still enjoy today. By 1963, I was back with more hits like It Happened at the World's Fair and Bossa Nova Baby. The EP Viva Las Vegas was a preview of what was to come, with songs like If You Think I Don't Need You and Come On Everybody. 1964 and 1965 were busy years. Kissin' Cousins and Fun in Acapulco were more movie soundtracks, and they included hits like Kissin' Cousins and Puppet on a String. Girl Happy and Harum Skarum were also part of this period, with tracks that showed I could still bring the energy and the fun. 1966 and 1967 saw me releasing more albums like Paradise Hawaiian Style and Spin Out. The gospel album How Great Thou Art was a return to my roots, and it was a way to connect with my faith and my fans on a deeper level. The late 1960s were a mix of hits and comebacks. Elvis NBC TV Special was a turning point with songs like If I Can Dream and One Night. From Elvis in Memphis was a return to form with hits like In the Ghetto and Suspicious Minds. The double album From Memphis to Vegas, From Vegas to Memphis was a way to show that I could still perform live and connect with my fans in a different way. By the early 1970s, I was still going strong. On Stage and Let's Be Friends were more albums that showed I could still bring the energy and the emotion. Kentucky Rain and The Wonder of You were hits that fans still love today. Every song, every album, and every moment on stage was a part of my journey. It was a wild ride, and I was just getting started. So as I think back on all the songs and albums from the late 1960s to the late 1970s, it's like a journey through time, through the highs and lows of my life and career. In 1970, I released albums like Elvis in Person at the International Hotel, Back in Memphis, and That's the Way It Is, filled with powerful tracks like How the Web Was Woven, Patch It Up, and Bridge Over Troubled Water. Each song feels like a part of me, a piece of my story. In 1971, I went country with Elvis Country, and it was a return to my roots with songs like Snowbird and Faded Love. The Christmas spirit was alive in Elvis Christmas Album, where I sang classics like Silent Night and Santa Claus is Back in Town. It was a time of reflection and celebration. 1972 brought a mix of emotions with Elvis Now and He Touched Me. Songs like Help Me Make It Through the Night and Amazing Grace spoke to the struggles and the faith that kept me going. Live performances at Madison Square Garden and in Hawaii captured the energy and the love of my fans. Burning Love and Separate Ways were big hits, and they showed that I could still connect with people in a deep way. The 1973 album, Aloha from Hawaii via Satellite, was a milestone. It was a global event, and the songs like Burning Love and An American Trilogy were some of my best. Raised on Rock and Good Times kept the spirit alive with tracks that were both nostalgic and new. In 1974, I released Elvis as recorded live on stage in Memphis, which was a mix of rock, soul, and gospel. Songs like CC Rider and How Great Thou Art showed the different sides of me. We Promised Land in 1974 and Today in 1975 continued this trend with tracks like Trouble and Pieces of My Life that resonated with my fans. 1976 brought From Elvis Presley Boulevard, Memphis, Tennessee, with songs like Hurt and Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain that were deeply personal. Welcome to My World in 1977 was a collection of covers that I loved, from Help Me Make It Through the Night to Your Cheatin' Heart. The Moody Blue album in 1977 was one of my last, and it had a mix of ballads and classics. Songs like Unchained Melody and Way Down were some of my favorites. The Elvis in Concert double album captured my final live performances with a mix of old favorites and new songs. After I was gone, the releases kept coming. He Walks Beside Me in 1978 was a tribute to my faith, and Elvis Sings for Children and Grown-Ups Too was a fun, family-friendly album. The Elvis, a legendary performer, series in the late 1970s and early 1980s brought together some of my best moments from live shows and studio sessions. In the end, all these songs and albums are a part of who I am. They tell my story, the story of a boy from Memphis who became a legend. Each song is a memory, a moment in time, and a feeling that I hope will live on through the music.